The dawn broke slow over the Montana Territory, a thin blade of pale gold cutting through the night's bitter dark. Cold hung in the air like a warning. Even the pines seemed to shiver as the wind carried flecks of frost that stung whatever skin dared show. Winter had come early that year, hard and unforgiving, turning every creek, riverbed, and watering hole into a treacherous mirror of ice. Calder Boone didn't mind the cold. A man learns to make peace with the weather when he's spent more nights under the sky than beneath a roof. Wrapped in a heavy wool coat patched at the elbows and riding a bay gelding that knew him better than most people ever had, Calder followed a familiar trail skirting the bluffs. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the crows were late rising. He breathed out, watching the steam drift, and wondered not for the first time why he kept riding the same lonely circuit each morning. Habit, maybe. Or maybe the world made more sense on horseback than anywhere else. The rhythm of hooves, the sting of cold, the smell of pine and wet leather. It kept his mind from drifting back to memories he wished he could forget. As he passed the bend where the creek cut across the trail, the horse's ears flicked forward. Calder felt the shift immediately. Animals always sensed something before men did. He tightened the reins and slowed to a halt. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. The gelding snorted, stamping once. Calder listened. At first he heard nothing but the wind scraping across frozen brush. Then faint, soft, almost too weak to be real, he caught a sound. A small muffled cry. No, not a cry. A whimper. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching on frost-stiff grass. The creek, half frozen, half flowing, moved sluggishly beneath a crust of ice. Mist rose from it in thin white tails. Calder walked closer, scanning the surface. That was when he saw it. 3 small shapes bundled, drifting slowly, caught in a swirl of slush and icy water. For a split second, he thought they might be sacks or parcels thrown from a wagon. But then one shifted. A tiny fist pushed weakly against the wet blanket wrapping it. His breath stopped dead in his chest. They were babies. 3 babies. Calder's heart slammed hard once, twice. The water wasn't deep, but it was deadly. The current tugged at the bundles, threatening to pull them under the ice shelf. Another minute, maybe less, and the creek would claim them. God Almighty, he whispered, already moving. He didn't think, didn't question. Some instincts run deeper than reason. He tore off his coat, tossed his hat aside, and waded in. The shock hit like a blow. The water knifed into him, stealing his breath, seizing his muscles. He gritted his teeth, forced his legs deeper, boots slipping on rocks beneath the ice. Every movement burned white-hot. The first bundle bumped against his thigh. Calder scooped it up and held it tight against his chest. The baby inside let out a feeble cry, alive, barely. He turned, lunged for the second. His fingers went numb halfway through the reach, but he managed to grab it, tucking it under his arm. The third was drifting farther away, dangerously close to an undercut ledge where the current spiraled. Calder staggered forward, half swimming, half fighting the pull. His lungs screamed for breath. He reached out, his fingers brushed cloth. He grabbed it, pulled back. Nearly slipped under himself, but he had all 3. Gasping, shaking violently, Calder stumbled out of the creek and collapsed to his knees on the bank. The babies were cold, too cold, but alive. They moved weakly beneath their wet wrappings, their cries soft and desperate. Calder stared down at them, water streaming from his clothes, breath coming in ragged clouds. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, but the creek offered no answer. Only the wind and the 3 lives he held shivering against his chest. Calder Boone had known cold before Montana winters didn't. Treat any living soul kindly, but the cold seizing his body now was something far crueler than nature's as usual bite. It was the kind that cut deep, straight to the marrow, the kind that wanted to claim a man whole. The freezing creek water dripped from his coat and shirt in steady rivulets, soaking the ground around him. His breath rattled in short bursts, fogging the air as he knelt over the 3 tiny bundles he'd hauled from the water. The babies' cries were thin, trembling, weakening with each passing second. Their lips were tinged blue, and their fragile bodies shook in uneven spasms. Calder had seen calves freeze in less time than this. These children didn't have long. "Stay with me," he muttered through chattering teeth. He stripped off his soaked gloves and threw them aside. His fingers were stiff, already numb, but he forced them to move. He unwrapped one of the blankets and flinched at the sight-purple skin. Trembling limbs, breath so shallow he had to lean close just to feel the warmth against his cheek. The child was barely hanging on. Calder cursed under his breath. "Come on, breathe, little one. Breathe." He rubbed the baby's arms and chest, trying to force circulation back into the stiff limbs. The child let out a weak whimper so faint Calder almost missed it, but it was enough to keep him working. He moved to the second bundle, then the third, repeating the same frantic motions. His own body shook harder with each passing second, but he kept going. Something inside him, a place he tried hard to bury, had cracked open. Too many nights he dreamed of the fire, the smoke, the bodies he couldn't reach in time. Too many mornings he'd woken with the same hollow ache in his chest, the guilt sitting on him like boulders. He had failed before. He would not fail now, not again. He gathered the 3 infants against his chest, wrapping them inside his coat, pressing their cold faces to the only warmth he had left, his own body heat. His shirt clung to his skin like ice, but the babies needed every shred of heat he could give. The gelding trotted nervously nearby, snorting clouds of steam. Calder staggered to his feet, nearly losing balance as his legs wobbled from the cold. He forced himself upright. He didn't have long. He could already feel numbness creeping into his arms and legs like vines of frost. He lifted his gaze toward the horizon. The nearest town was more than a mile away. Dr. Wynne had the only warm hearth and safe hands capable of keeping these babies alive. But a mile, in this cold, carrying 3 near-frozen infants? It felt impossible. But he wasn't choosing for himself. He mounted the horse clumsily, almost dropping one of the babies as his numb fingers slipped. A bolt of panic shot through him, sharp enough to ignite his strength. He gripped all 3 infants more securely, pulling them tight to his chest. "Easy, boy," he whispered to the horse. "We ride steady. No jolting, these little ones can't take it." The gelding responded with a soft whinny, as if understanding the gravity of what depended on him. Calder nudged him forward. The horse eased into a careful trot, then a faster pace, snow kicking up with every step. Each breath Calder drew felt heavier than the last. His vision blurred at the edges, dark spots flickering in and out, but he held on. He bent low over the horse's neck, trying to shield the babies from the wind. "Hold on," he murmured. "Just hold on." The babies let out faint noises, whimpers, tiny sighs, signs of life. Calder focused on those sounds, clung to them. They were proof he hadn't been too late. The creek faded behind them, swallowed by distance and the rising morning light. Ahead lay the town, the doctor, hope if he could reach it in time. Calder urged the horse onward, his jaw clenched, his body shaking, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He had jumped into an icy grave for 3 strangers. Now he would ride through hell itself to keep them alive. The warmth inside Dr. Elara Wynne's clinic should have been comforting, but Calder Boone felt none of it. His clothes were still wet, clinging to him like a second icy skin. His fingers throbbed painfully as blood tried to find its way back into them. A blanket hung around his shoulders, but it did little to chase off the cold still lodged deep in his bones. Yet none of that compared to the chill settling in his gut. Triplets, marked with the Rexton crest. Elara moved between the 3 makeshift warming crib's wooden drawers, lined with heated bricks and blankets, checking pulses, rubbing tiny arms, coaxing warmth back into fragile bodies. The nurse, Clara, worked beside her silently. Even she didn't dare speak above a whisper. Calder knew why. Whispers traveled fast in small towns, especially whispers involving the Rexton family. Outside, the first real stirrings of morning had begun. Doors opening, boots crunching on snow, wagons rolling. The usual chorus of a frontier town coming awake. But Calder could feel something different in the air, something watchful. Clara finally broke the silence. "People are already asking why the clinic lamps are lit so early," she said softly. "They saw your horse ride in." 3 bundles carried inside. Her voice trembled. "Word will spread." Elara shot a sharp look at her, but she didn't disagree. The Rextons had a way of hearing everything. Briar Hollow was practically their kingdom. The ranch stretched miles in any direction, and their money stitched the town together like invisible thread. More than a few businesses survived only because the family allowed it. Calder exhaled slowly. "I reckon we've got minutes, not hours, before one of their riders starts sniffing around." Elara approached him, arms crossed tightly. "Calder, you don't understand what shape this puts us in. Babies with the Rexton crest?" She lowered her voice. "There is no such thing as a Rexton secret that doesn't come with blood attached." He met her eyes. "I didn't choose to be part of it." "Maybe not. But you are now." A soft cry rose from one of the babies, stronger than before. Calder's head snapped toward the sound. The infant's tiny fists pushed weakly against the blanket. Alive. Fighting. He felt something swell in his chest relief. Fierce and dangerous. Elara saw it too. Her expression softened. "You saved them, Calder." "Without you, they would have been gone in minutes." He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure if he'd saved them or just delayed something worse. A loud thud outside made Clara flinch. Bootsteps. Several of them. Elara moved quickly to the window and peered through a slit in the curtain. Her face paled. "They're already asking around," she whispered. "Ranch hands." "Rexton riders." Calder stiffened. "Looking for the babies?" "Looking for something," Elara said. "They wouldn't send riders before breakfast unless they were covering a mess." Covering a mess. Yes, that sounded like the Rextons. Calder paced, running a hand through his damp hair. "What do folks know about them?" "Beyond the usual rumors." Elara hesitated. "More than they say out loud." Dr. Clara swallowed hard, then whispered, "People disappear, Mr. Boone. Servants, ranch girls, hired hands, anyone who crosses them. Sometimes folks whisper that the family's reputation matters more than life itself." Calder felt his jaw clench. He thought of the babies floating in the freezing creek, left to die without a trace. "So this ain't the first time," he said quietly. Elara didn't answer, and that silence told him everything. A knock rattled the door, hard enough to make all 3 adults jump. "Win?" A man's voice called through the wood. "We got some questions." Calder didn't move, didn't breathe. Elara glanced at the babies, then at Calder. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Whatever happens next, don't let them see those children." The knock at the clinic door came again, sharper, more insistent this time. Calder Boone felt every muscle in his body tighten. The babies lay bundled in the makeshift warming cribs, their breaths shallow but stronger than before. Elara Wynne stood frozen for half a heartbeat, then moved into action. "Clara," she whispered, "get the babies into the back room. Keep the lamps low. No sound, no movement unless I call for you." Clara nodded quickly and began gathering the tiny bundles with trembling hands. Calder stepped forward instinctively to help, but Elara grabbed his arm. "You can't be seen either." Calder blinked. "It's my face they'll recognize first." "Exactly," she said. "You ride alone. You don't answer to anyone. If the Rextons think you're hiding something, they won't stop digging until they find it." Calder didn't argue. She was right. He ducked behind the door leading to the pantry just as Elara unlocked the front. The cold morning air rushed in, along with 2 Rexton Ranch hands big, broad men wrapped in dusters and suspicion. Snow clung to their boots and hats. One had a scar running down his cheek. The other carried himself like someone looking for a fight. "Doctor," Scarcheek said, tipping his hat in a way that wasn't respectful at all. "We been told there was commotion. Lights on early. Folks saying someone came in soaked to the bone." Ilara's face stayed calm, professional. "A rancher came in with frostbite concerns. Nothing unusual for this weather." The second man's gaze swept the room. "That so?" His boots creaked against the wood floor as he stepped further inside. "Funny. The tracks outside suggest more than one small bundle carried in." Calder pressed further into the shadows, his hand inching toward the pistol at his hip. He didn't want a gunfight, not with babies in the next room, not with the clinic boxed in tight, but danger was steps away. Ilara kept her voice steady. "You're free to look around the front room, but I have patients recovering in the back. You can't barge in and frighten them." Scarcheek stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. "You know as well as anyone, Doc. The Rexton family has an interest in the health of this town. Wouldn't want rumors getting around. Wouldn't want trouble." Ilara's jaw tensed, but she didn't back down. "This is a place of medicine, not intimidation. If you have questions, ask them. Otherwise, you're wasting my time." Calder admired her nerve, even if her defiance made his pulse jump. These men weren't used to being challenged. The second rider let his gaze settle on a puddle of water dripping from Calder's coat still drying near the stove. "That coat doesn't belong to any patient you've mentioned." Ilara didn't blink. "That coat belongs to me," she lied smoothly. "I washed it last night." The man smirked. "Looks mighty big for you. And mighty fresh." Before things escalated, Clara reappeared from the back room with perfect timing, carrying a stack of blankets as though she'd been busy tending to patients. "Dr. Wynne," she said, acting surprised, "the older gentleman in the back is asking for his pain draft." "Should I prepare it?" Ilara turned sharply. "Yes, at once." The blatant display of normalcy seemed to stall the ranch hands. If they pushed harder, they'd risk looking foolish or worse, like thugs harassing a doctor for no reason. Their authority only worked with silence backing it, not witnesses. Scarcheek finally huffed. "If you hear about anything unusual, you let the Rextons know." "Of course," Ilara said coolly. The men stepped back onto the porch. "Keep your doors locked," the second one added with false politeness. "Cold brings out strange things." Ilara shut the door before they could say more and before her shaking hands could betray her. She turned to Calder's hiding place. "They're suspicious already," she said in a low voice. "We don't have much time." Calder stepped out, tension knotting across his shoulders. Those weren't ordinary ranch hands. Those were enforcers. Ilara nodded grimly. "The Rextons don't send men like that unless the family is scared." Calder looked toward the back room where the babies lay fighting for life. "Then we're already in deeper than we thought." Ilara met his eyes, fear, determination, and a spark of something fiercer glowing beneath. "Calder," she said, "like it or not, we're allies now." And allies against the Rextons meant walking a razor's edge. By midday, the worst of the morning's panic had settled into a tense, suffocating quiet inside Dr. Wynne's clinic. The three babies, now dry, swaddled, and gently warmed, slept fitfully under Clara's watch. Their little chests rose and fell with fragile rhythm, each breath a small victory. Calder Boone, however, couldn't sit still long enough to feel relief. He paced in front of the stove, boots leaving wet marks on the wooden floor, his mind replaying the same questions over and over. Who had placed the triplets in the creek? And who had marked them with the Rexton crest? No ranch hand would dare touch that symbol without the family's blessing. He stopped, jaw tight. There was only one way to find answers: go back to where it happened. Ilara seemed to read his thoughts as she stepped from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Calder, don't even think about it. You're still freezing, you're exhausted, and the creek. I need to see what happened," he cut in. Someone dumped those babies with care enough to wrap them tight. That don't sound like a drunk mistake. Sounds like someone was forced or scared, Ilara frowned. You go back out there alone, and if the Rextons are sniffing around, they could follow you. They're already sniffing. He shrugged on his half-dry coat and holstered his revolver. Ilara blocked the door, eyes blazing with equal parts worry and defiance. You come back with answers, she said. Not another body for me to patch together. Calder managed a faint smile. I'll do my best. But her face didn't soften, not even a little. The wind had picked up again when Calder returned to the creek, sharp and cold enough to sink through layers of clothing. Snow crunched under his boots in crisp, brittle snaps. The place looked different now. In the full light of day the ice gleamed. The water moved sluggishly beneath it, and the small depression where he'd knelt earlier was still visible in the snow. But it wasn't the creek that caught his eye, it was everything around it. Tracks, lots of them. Footprints, wagon ruts, and churned snow where someone had been running or wrestling. Calder crouched low, scanning with a tracker's eye. He'd spent years reading the ground like a book. He knew the language of snow and mud better than he knew most people. He leaned closer. Boot prints, 2 different sizes. One light, almost hurried. One heavy, deliberate. A struggle. Broken branches at shoulder height. A torn scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn. He plucked at free pale fabric, soft, the kind belonging to a woman's dress. His stomach tightened. He followed the trail further. Wagon wheels had cut deep into the snow, leading toward a narrow path that curved toward the woods. The marks were fresh, no more than hours old, and the way the horses had stumbled suggested the driver was in a hurry or frightened. Then something else caught his attention. Kneeling marks, 2 small impressions in the snow near the creek's edge. Someone had knelt there, close enough to the water to place the bundles in. He knelt beside them, tracing the edges with his fingertips. The prints were small. Not a man's, a woman's. Calder swallowed hard. She had knelt here. She had placed the babies carefully, not roughly tossed them. And she had stayed long enough to leave deep impressions, hesitation, fear, maybe grief. He stood, scanning the tree line. Someone else had been here too. A larger set of tracks spread wide, suggesting a man bracing himself. Beside those, deeper drag marks, as if he'd forced someone forward. Calder pictured it. A woman being pulled, babies taken, placed in the water. But why? Then he saw it, a flash of something in the grass. A medallion, half buried in frost. He knelt and lifted it. A silver pendant, engraved with the Rexton crest. Someone had lost it during the struggle. Someone important. Calder's pulse hammered. He looked toward the woods, following the trail of tracks disappearing into shadow. Whoever did this hadn't gotten far, and Calder Boone was done reacting. It was time to hunt. By the time Calder Boone returned to Briar Hollow, dusk was creeping in, slow, bruised, and heavy. The trail from the creek had led far into the timberline before fading into the shadow of the woods, swallowed by more snow and the churn of recent riders. Someone had covered their tracks deliberately. Someone who knew the land as well as he did. He carried the silver pendant in his pocket, its weight far heavier than its size. A Rexton crest. Fine craftsmanship. No ranch hand would wear something so delicate. It belonged to someone from inside the family. Inside the clinic, lamplight glowed soft and warm. Ilara met him at the door, worry written plain on her face. "You're freezing," she said. "Get in before you collapse," but Calder shook his head. Someone was with those babies. A woman. Left her tracks clear as day. "And I found this." He placed the pendant on the table. Ilara's breath caught. "That's Myra Rexton's." Calder frowned. "You sure?" "I treated her once." She had this exact pendant around her neck. It was a birthday gift from her mother. Ilara hesitated. "Myra isn't like the others. People say she's the only Rexton with a conscience." Calder wasn't sure what to make of that. But before he could ask more, A soft knock sounded at the back door, 3 taps, a pause, 2 more taps. Not a ranch hand's knock. Quiet, careful, afraid. Clara looked toward Ilara. Should I? Ilara shook her head. I'll open it. She moved cautiously, cracked the door, and inhaled sharply. A young woman stood there, shivering in a cloak too thin for winter, her breath clouding the air. Snow clung to the hem of her dress. Her eyes, wide, glassy, desperate, were unmistakably the blue-gray of the Rexton bloodline. Mira, Ilara whispered. You shouldn't be here. Mira Rexton pushed past her before the doctor could stop her. She looked around frantically until her gaze landed on Calder. You're the one who found them, she said, voice trembling. Where are they? Calder didn't move. That depends on who you are to them. Mira's breath hitched, and for a moment her composure crumbled entirely. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting for control. When she finally spoke, her voice was a cracked whisper. They're my children, Clara gasped softly. Ilara's expression hardened, not with anger, but with the terrible certainty of someone who already suspected the truth. Calder felt heat rise in his chest. Your family put your babies in an icy creek? Myra flinched. Not my whole family. My brothers. Rowan and Elias. She swallowed, tears slipping down her cheeks. The pregnancy, it was hidden. They said triplets born out of wedlock would ruin everything. They said, her voice broke. They said I didn't have a choice. Calder stepped toward her, jaw clenched. You did have a choice. You left the pendant. You wanted someone to find them. Mira nodded weakly. I tried to run. I tried to save them. But Rowan, he dragged me back. He took them. I followed him to the woods, but I couldn't stop him. I lost the pendant when he pulled me away. Her voice turned hollow. I thought I'd never see them again. Ilara guided her gently to a chair. Mira, they're alive. Thanks to Calder. The young woman choked on a sob, one hand clutching her cloak, the other pressed to her heart. Please, please let me see them. Calder studied her for a long moment. Her desperation wasn't feigned. Her fear was real. Her hands were scraped in bruised marks of struggle, not luxury. This wasn't a woman who had abandoned her children. This was a mother who had risked everything to save them. Finally, he nodded. Come on. Mira followed him into the back room. The moment she saw the 3 sleeping infants, her knees nearly buckled. She dropped beside the warming cribs, trembling hands hovering over each small face. My babies? My sweet babies? Her tears fell freely now. Mama's here. Calder stood silently in the doorway, watching her fall apart and rebuild herself all at once. Her voice shook when she finally looked up at him. They'll come for me. And for them, she whispered, my brothers won't stop. Not until every trace of this is gone. Calder's jaw tightened. Then they'll have to go through me first, and from the fire that lit in Myra's eyes, she believed him. By the time Calder Boone returned to Briar Hollow, dusk was creeping in slow, bruised, and heavy. The trail from the creek had led far into the timberline before fading into the shadow of the woods, swallowed by more snow and the churn of recent riders. Someone had covered their tracks deliberately. Someone who knew the land as well as he did. He carried the silver pendant in his pocket, its weight far heavier than its size. A Rexton crest, fine craftsmanship. No ranch hand would wear something so delicate. It belonged to someone from inside the family. Inside the clinic, lamplight glowed soft and warm. Ilara met him at the door, worry written plain on her face. You're freezing, she said. Get in before you collapse. But Calder shook his head. Someone was with those babies. A woman. Left her tracks clear as day. And I found this. He placed the pendant on the table. Ilara's breath caught. That's Myra Rexton's. Calder frowned. You sure? I treated her once. She had this exact pendant around her neck. It was a birthday gift from her mother. Ilara hesitated. Myra isn't like the others. People say she's the only Rexton with a conscience. Calder wasn't sure what to make of that. But before he could ask more, a soft knock sounded at the back door, 3 taps, a pause, 2 more taps. Not a ranch hand's knock. Quiet, careful, afraid. Clara looked toward Ilara. "Should I?" Ilara shook her head. "I'll open it." She moved cautiously, cracked the door, and inhaled sharply. A young woman stood there, shivering in a cloak too thin for winter, her breath clouding the air. Snow clung to the hem of her dress. Her eyes, wide, glassy, desperate, were unmistakably the blue-gray of the Rexton bloodline. "Myra," Ilara whispered. "You shouldn't be here." Myra Rexton pushed past her before the doctor could stop her. She looked around frantically until her gaze landed on Calder. "You're the one who found them," she said, voice trembling. "Where are they?" Calder didn't move. "That depends on who you are to them." Myra's breath hitched, and for a moment her composure crumbled entirely. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting for control. When she finally spoke, her voice was a cracked whisper. "They're my children," Clara gasped softly. Ilara's expression hardened not with anger, but with the terrible certainty of someone who already suspected the truth. Calder felt heat rise in his chest. "Your family put your babies in an icy creek?" Myra flinched. "Not my whole family. My brothers. Rowan and Elias," she swallowed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "The pregnancy. It was hidden. They said triplets born out of wedlock would ruin everything. They said—" Her voice broke. "They said I didn't have a choice." Calder stepped toward her, jaw clenched. "You did have a choice. You left the pendant. You wanted someone to find them." Myra nodded weakly. "I tried to run. I tried to save them. But Rowan, he dragged me back. He took them. I followed him to the woods, but I couldn't stop him. I lost the pendant when he pulled me away." Her voice turned hollow. "I thought I'd never see them again." Ilara guided her gently to a chair. "Myra, they're alive." Thanks to Calder. The young woman choked on a sob, one hand clutching her cloak, the other pressed to her heart. "Please, please let me see them." Calder studied her for a long moment. Her desperation wasn't feigned. Her fear was real. Her hands were scraped in bruised marks of struggle, not luxury. His wasn't a woman who had abandoned her children. This was a mother who had risked everything to save them. Finally, he nodded. "Come on." Myra followed him into the back room. The moment she saw the 3 sleeping infants, her knees nearly buckled. She dropped beside the warming cribs, trembling hands hovering over each small face. "My babies, my sweet babies." Her tears fell freely now. "Mama's here." Calder stood silently in the doorway, watching her fall apart and rebuild herself all at once. Her voice shook when she finally looked up at him. "They'll come for me, and for them," she whispered. "My brothers won't stop, not until every trace of this is gone." Calder's jaw tightened. "Then they'll have to go through me first, and from the fire that lit in Myra's eyes." She believed him. Night fell heavy over Briar Hollow, the kind of night that pressed against windows and muted every sound under its weight. The clinic, usually a place of quiet healing, felt tighter now, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Myra Rexton sat beside the warming cribs, her trembling fingers brushing gently over each child's blanket. She hadn't moved from their side since Calder brought her in. Exhaustion clung to her, but fear kept her awake. Calder stood near the front window, peering through a thin gap in the curtain. His horse was tied out back, hidden from the street. The only light came from the lamplight inside, which made everything beyond the glass look even darker. Ilara analyzed him with the doctor's precision. "You're expecting them tonight." Calder didn't bother denying it. Rextons don't let things linger. If Rowan and Elias dumped those babies, they'll want to make sure their problem stayed solved. Ilara crossed her arms tightly. "That means they'll come armed." Calder exhaled softly, a sound halfway between a sigh and a curse. "That's what I'm counting on." Men like them don't ask questions when they think they already know the answers. Footsteps echoed from the hallway as Clara approached, face pale. "I've barred the back door." "But, Dr. Wynne, this is madness. If they find the babies here, they'll kill us all." Mira looked up sharply. "No." She stood wobbly, but fierce. "This is my fault. I'll talk to them. I'll tell them I'll leave, or I'll disappear anything. Just don't let them hurt the children." Calder turned from the window. "Talk won't save you. They made their choice when they threw your babies in a creek." Mira's eyes filled again. "They weren't always like this. After Father died, Rowan started acting like he owned the whole territory. Elias just follows him." Calder shook his head. "Doesn't matter. A man shows you who he is when nobody's watching. And your brothers showed themselves today." Alara stepped beside Mira, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here. And so are your children." A sudden series of harsh hoofbeats cut through the silence. Calder stiffened. "They're here." Alara extinguished all lamps but one, plunging the clinic into dim gold shadows. Calder moved to the door, quietly sliding the heavy wooden bar across. Mira clutched her cloak around herself, trembling. "What do we do?" Calder checked his revolver, his jaw tightening like steel. "We hold." The hoofbeats stopped. Moments later, bang, bang, a fist slammed against the door so hard the hinges rattled. A voice, deep and cold, called out, "Alara Wynne, open this door. Rowan Rexton." Mira flinched as those struck. Calder motioned for her to stay back. "Behind the counter," he whispered. "Keep low." Alara stood near the babies, spine straight, expression calm only on the surface. Rowan pounded again. "We know you've got someone in there. And we know Boone's with you." Calder stepped closer to the door, but stayed silent. Another voice joined Elias, rougher, impatient. "Open up, Doc. Wouldn't want to make this ugly." Mira covered her mouth, eyes wide as terror swallowed her breathing. Calder finally answered. "Clinic's closed." A harsh laugh came from outside. "Not to the 3 newborns you took in this morning." Alara cursed under her breath. "Someone talked," she whispered. Calder's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter who. They're at the door now." Outside, snow crunched under dismounting boots. Calder could picture the scene: 2 armed men, restless horses, the glint of rifle steel. The lantern light that flickered beneath the doorframe confirmed it. "Boone," Rowan called. "Those babies ain't yours, and they ain't hers." His tone sharpened. "Hand them over, and we'll forget this happened." Calder looked at the sleeping triplets. Tiny breaths. Tiny lives. Then at Mira, broken, terrified, and still standing. "No," Calder said, just one word. But it carried the weight of a gunshot. Silence stretched. Then, "Kick the damn door." Calder spun, grabbing Alara's shoulder. "Get Mira and the babies in the back room." Alara didn't waste a second. The first boot slammed against the door, wood cracking. Calder drew his revolver. Another kick, louder, splintering. The standoff had begun, and Calder Boone was ready to meet it head on. The storm hit without warning. One moment, the night had been tense but quiet. The next, snow swirled violently, blinding, a freezing wall pressing against the clinic's thin walls. Wind howled down the streets of Briar Hollow, carrying ice and frozen debris like tiny knives. Outside, the Rexton brothers' horses pawed impatiently at the ground, restless beneath the storm. Calder Boone braced against the chaos, revolver in hand. The first kick against the clinic door splintered the wood, and he fired a warning shot, just enough to make them pause. Rowan and Elias didn't flinch. They were men accustomed to fear, accustomed to taking what they wanted. But Calder had nothing left to fear. Inside, Mira huddled with the triplets, blankets wrapped tight around them. Her hands trembled as she stroked their tiny heads, whispering reassurances they couldn't understand yet. Alara leaned against the counter, one hand on the doorframe, the other gripping a small satchel of tools. She was ready, not to heal, but to defend. Calder could see it all in silhouette, the first shadowy shapes pressing against the cracked wood. He fired again, the sound deafening in the small clinic. Snow and wind whipped against the windows, drowning out any sound beyond the room. The storm was an ally, masking movement, confusing the enemy. The door splintered further. Elias forced his way in first, shoulder driving wood aside. Calder fired, and the man fell, his arm broken, cursing through clenched teeth. Rowan stepped forward, eyes blazing, fists tight. Calder's heart pounded not from fear, but from fury, guilt, and determination. Too long he had run from himself, too long he had watched others suffer while he hid behind a cowboy's stoic mask. Not tonight. Not for these babies. The room erupted into chaos. Calder grappled with Rowan, fists and boots colliding with the man's. Alara grabbed a metal tray, swinging it with precise strikes to distract Elias, who had gotten to his feet. Mira clutched one of the babies to her chest, eyes wide, ready to scream but frozen by terror. In the corner, Clara held the other two infants, her small frame dwarfed by the storm raging outside. Snowflakes blew through cracks in the door, dusting her hair and shoulders like tiny sparks. Calder caught sight of her and realized he wasn't alone, not now, not ever again. This fight wasn't just his. It belonged to all of them. Rowan lunged. Calder dodged, twisting hard, and slammed him into the counter. Wood groaned and cracked. Rowan cursed, grabbing Calder's arm, trying to wrest him down. Calder's revolver slipped from his grip. He fought with bare hands, every strike fueled by desperation, by guilt over children he hadn't saved before, by rage at a world that didn't reward the good and punish the innocent. Alara, seeing an opening, grabbed a heavy lamp and swung it at Elias. The man staggered back, cursing, blinded by the sudden light. Mira screamed, the sound piercing and raw, galvanizing Calder. He twisted free from Rowan's grip, seizing his revolver. Two quick shots rang out. Rowan dropped, eyes wide in shock. Elias scrambled for the door, but Alara met him with a solid strike that sent him crashing into a wall. The storm outside raged harder, snow battering the building. Calder finally allowed himself a ragged breath, glancing at the triplets. They stirred, tiny cries mingling with the roar of wind. Mira's tears fell freely as she wrapped them tighter to her chest. Relief and exhaustion tangled inside her, raw and overwhelming. Calder leaned against the counter, muscles trembling from adrenaline. Mira turned to him, voice shaky but firm. "You saved them," she whispered. "You saved all of us." Calder's gaze dropped to the floor. "We saved them," he said quietly, "all of us. And we'll keep them safe, no matter what comes next." Outside, the storm began to swallow the Rextons' tracks, erasing their presence like they had never been. Calder watched the snow swirl and felt, for the first time in years, a sense of clarity, of purpose. The past might haunt him, but the future these three lives were worth fighting for. The snowstorm raged, but inside the clinic, a fragile victory had been won. Calder Boone, broken but unbowed, realized he had finally found a reason to live beyond the ghosts of his past. The snowstorm that had raged through Briar Hollow all night finally began to ease, leaving a crisp, blinding white morning in its wake. Icicles hung from eaves like fragile daggers, and the roofs of small wooden homes were buried under fresh drifts. For Calder Boone, it was a quiet, almost miraculous peace after the chaos that had consumed the previous 24 hours. Inside Dr. Alara Wynn's clinic, warmth spread from the stove, carrying a sense of safety Calder hadn't felt in years. The three triplets slept quietly in their blankets, their breaths even and calm. Mira Rexton sat beside them, eyes red-rimmed but glowing with exhaustion and relief. She didn't move much, afraid that even the smallest motion might disturb the fragile lives before her. Calder watched her, standing just inside the door, his coat still damp from the creek, his body sore from the struggle against the Rexton brothers, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. There was no pretense in Mira's gaze now, only gratitude and trust, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for a long time. Ilara moved between them, tending to small wounds, smoothing blankets, and checking temperatures. "They're stable," she said softly. "If we keep this pace, they'll be strong enough to thrive in a few weeks." She glanced at Calder. "Thanks to you?" Calder's jaw tightened. "I didn't do it alone." His gaze fell on Myra. "Neither did I," Mira swallowed, brushing snowflakes from her cloak. "I thought I had no hope. I thought my brothers had won. But you saved them. You gave me a chance to protect them." Her voice trembled. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Calder said. He felt something stir in him, a long-buried, fragile kind of hope. "Just keep them alive." Outside, the world gleamed in the frozen light. Calder knew the Rextons would not easily forget what had happened. Rowan and Elias were beaten, humiliated, and their pride wounded. If they came back, it would be with fire and fury. But for now, the immediate threat had passed, and that was enough to breathe. Calder turned to the triplets. They were tiny, vulnerable, yet somehow impossibly strong. He bent over them, careful not to disturb their sleep, and traced the faint outline of their Rexton crests, now symbols not of cruelty, but survival. "You've got a lot of living to do," he whispered. "And I'm not letting anyone ever take that from you." Mira reached out, her hand brushing Calder's shoulder. "I know now you're not just a broken cowboy," she said softly. "You've got a heart bigger than the mountains, Calder Boone. You saved my children. You saved me." He allowed himself a small, wry smile, one that didn't reach the depths of his usual humor, but carried warmth. "Maybe I've been broken for a long time. But maybe, just maybe, I can be fixed." For the first time in years, Calder didn't feel like the lone man riding through snow and sorrow. He had a purpose now, a family he had helped keep alive. And as Mira looked to him, hope in her eyes, and as the infants stirred gently, their small cries filling the room with the sound of life, he realized that purpose was enough to anchor him. Ilara placed a hand on Calder's arm. "You've done more than save lives tonight," she said quietly. "You've given them a future." Calder glanced out the window, where the morning sun reflected off frozen branches and snowdrifts. The Rextons might still seek vengeance, but it would be a long ride back to darkness. For now he had warmth, he had life, and he had a reason to keep moving forward. Mira smiled, a small, hopeful curve of lips, and whispered to the triplets, "Welcome to the world, my loves. We're going to protect you, all of us." Calder felt a weight lift off his chest, a life of guilt and regret replaced by one of responsibility, courage and fragile, beautiful hope. He wasn't just a broken cowboy anymore. He was their protector, their guardian, their family. Outside, the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the snow-covered town. And for Calder Boone, Myra Rexton, Ilara Wynne, and the three little survivors, it was the first dawn of something new, a beginning carved from ice, blood, and courage. The past could not be erased, but the future, that belonged to them.